they have this like expandable, dynamic, spinny, colorful wheel for all their tools. And so it's a little circle and you press it and then it goes, and you can spin around and you can select all the colors and go down and change the brushes. And it's gotten me thinking like, maybe that's the future on these screens of different sizes, is some sort of dynamic toolbar paradigm that we need to dig deeper into. So hi, I'm Emilie, and I'm a developer advocate, also known as a developer relations engineer at Google. And I work on Android apps on large screens, mostly ChromeOS. And this involves things like samples, docs, but also working one-on-one with specific developers on specific app projects. So doing that work is really great because I get to work on Android code. I sometimes merge stuff into mainline, which is really cool. And then I also get to keep like at least one foot in the developer world and real life problems, which in the wonderful world of Google we can get away from sometimes. So it's been about 6 years. I've been working on ChromeOS and Android on ChromeOS, which is cool. It's a cool project. We're running Android in a VM, and it runs pretty well. It runs pretty performantly, which is pretty exciting. Change my slides. So I'm going to start by hopefully convincing you all why you should care about large screens, and then move on to talk a bit about input, mouse, keyboard, stylus, and more. I'm going to talk a little bit about layout and Compose, though there's a whole run of Compose-focused talks already. I'm excited about, there's one just on window size classes, which is a great topic for large screens, so I'm excited about that. And then I thought I'd finish off by talking about some things I've been working on personally, sort of stories from the front line of developer land. I've been working on media and video editing apps specifically, as well as some games. So I thought I would cover that. Hopefully it's interesting. At the end, I have a slide with all the links I talk about, so you don't have to rush to take a photo or write anything down. And of course, I hope there's going to be time for questions if I don't get distracted. So why am I here right now? Why should developers like you care about large screens? I am going to convince you in the next about 5 minutes. This is the main reason. Users, they really, really matter. All of your users matter. And I think as developers, we sometimes think, okay, we want to make the most money, of course. We want to serve the most users, and we want to do the least amount of work. Makes perfect sense, And so I hope you like my drawings, because this is not official data. Obviously, this is illustrative. But we look at, forgetting where, we're just looking at large screen size. We could say, okay, phones have the most number of users, let's say. So smaller screens have the most number of users. There's not that many users on these larger devices. And so we say, okay, so we're going to focus on the subset of users. It's going to be the most bang for our engineering investment. That makes perfect sense. But I'm going to challenge you a little bit and say, what if your usage from your users looked like this? So actual time spent in the app. So this makes a lot of sense, for example, with drawing apps or games. For example, on some of the apps we've worked with, users are spending way more time when they've got a Chromebook in front of them or a tablet, or even a foldable. Just having a larger screen means they're investing more and more time in that. And especially on games, some of the games we've worked with, spend is related to this as well. So if you're playing a game for longer, or you're using a drawing app for longer, you're more likely to buy a brush set, you're more likely to buy those in-game things. So, this is my challenge to think about it. Maybe you have to care about phone users. Please care about your portrait phone users of all those sizes. But, some of your most valuable users may not be using portrait devices. So there you have it. And in fact, I would argue even, sometimes you don't know that your users are using these large form factors. On my team, sometimes people come to us and say, we've got all these reports from Chromebook users. What's a Chromebook? Can you run Android apps on Chromebooks? The answer is yes, you can. And they don't know how to support or debug those issues. So that's where my team steps in. But be flexible, support all the layouts, support input, use Compose, and you may support a whole new niche of users you didn't even know about. I hope that's true. So if you don't remember anything from the talk, you should remember this. Go to the large screen app quality guidelines, test your app, just go through the checkboxes and see how you measure up. This is supposed to be me. By the way, I love dinosaurs. And that's actually my email address at Google, Hadrasaur at Google. Anyway, I hope you like my drawings, because if you don't, it's going to be a miserable hour, because this is my style. Lastly, kind of a negative approach to this is if your user has a tablet that came with a detachable keyboard or a foldable that my Samsung Fold I got came with a Bluetooth keyboard, shipped with one, or a Chromebook, and your app doesn't work with the keyboard, then your app is 100% broken. So even if there's only a small percentage of your users in that situation, it's really frustrating. And I think if you've ever used an app that should do something and should work, if I press enter, it should send my chat message, right? It feels so broken, and I might be so disgruntled, I leave a negative review or a media post, or something like that. I thought I'd share a few more. I love that BugDroid has his body back, or their body back. I'm so happy about that. So they are overused in my slides today, so apologies about that. But I thought I'd include some bloopers. So that's like in a film when things go wrong in the take. They call it a blooper reel. Things we've seen working with large screens that happen all the time. So I used to work on Android camera, and Android camera is super complicated. Has anyone worked on camera in the room? Aha, so you know what I'm talking about. You've seen this, maybe. It's super hard to work with camera. And so if you're working on camera, you should be using Camera X. I helped launch that library, which makes working with camera on Android so much easier if you can. Camera X. And at the end of the slides, I have a link for it. But sometimes you need to use Camera 2 directly. That's the Android camera APIs. To do all the advanced stuff you need to do. And it's complicated, which is partially due to the complexity of having a camera sensor. There's so many OEMs, there's so many lenses, there's so many SoCs all trying to differentiate themselves and do something different. And most of the burden's on Android to make that all just magically work perfectly for you. And when we fail at that, the burden's on you to try to deal with all those special situations. And so we see this a lot on foldables and tablets and Chromebooks because according to the CDD, so what hardware manufacturers must do, the camera sensor's long side, so most camera sensors are landscape, the long side has to line up with the long side of a phone, of the screen. So if you have a portrait phone, landscape sensor, it's going to be rotated 90 degrees. This is kind of the default state. On top of that, manufacturers say, I'm going to have my camera resolution match perfectly my screen. That makes sense. Or some very clean ratio of that. That makes sense. The problem is when developers say, okay, all the time, there's going to be a 90-degree rotation, and the image is going to line up perfectly. Of course, that doesn't always happen. For example, a tablet that has a detachable, the default is going to be landscape or a ChromeOS device. Or on foldables or tablets, when you resize, what your screen size resolution is going to be different than the window size your app finds itself in. So we've seen all sorts of stretched out, ridiculous situations like this. So at the end of the talk, I'll have another link to an article we wrote about getting this right on camera orientation, so check it out. Another one I might talk about 2 or 3 times is keyboard support. We see a lot of apps that have input fields, like this chat app. This is supposed to be a message where the person's trying to send a message, but every time they press enter, it just enters a new line instead of sending a message, and it's super frustrating. Okay, let's see if I can break Google Slides. Oh, that actually loaded. So when I first started on ChromeOS, we used to test a lot of apps to see how they were doing with resizing, because this was kind of a new field where suddenly these phone apps were being shown on, maybe a 4K external screen. So the first thing we do was resize. We just resize the window like this and see if we could break the app. And we mostly succeeded in breaking a ton of apps. Because on a OS like ChromeOS or Dex or any of the desktop things, a resize event can generate like hundreds of UI teardown and rebuild events. Just like that, teardown, rebuild, teardown, if you have a smooth resizing. And apps just weren't ready for that. Nowadays, things are a lot better with architecture components and a view model, and we have a little bit better guidance about separating UI from your app logic, which is great. So mostly this is getting better, but we still see a lot of crashes. And this especially happens when apps are trying to handle configuration changes themselves. So what do I mean by that? Normally, if you rotate the phone, or you plug in a keyboard, or you have a density change or something, or a locale change, Android tears down your UI, goes to what? The on stop state, and then goes back to on create and rebuilds your AI. And this is by design, because your app needs to know which locale it's in, needs to know what the screen resolution is. Some devs say, oh, we hate it when that happens. You know, we hate it when our UI gets torn down and rebuilt. So we don't want to do that on rotation, so we're going to override. You can put in your manifest, I'm going to override this config change. I handle on configuration change, and I'm going to manually intercept that rotation events because I don't want to deal with it. Unfortunately, there's so many configuration change events that could happen that probably you're not doing this correctly. So unless you're writing a game engine, do not handle configuration changes. This is my normal slide, by the way. This is my normal official slide with no drawings on it. So don't do this unless you're like really sure you're doing it. For example, if you plug in an external monitor on a Chromebook or a tablet, or you move your app, or you unfold a device and the foldable happens to have a screen with a different density, you're going to get a density config change. And almost no one except game engines knows how to handle that correctly. So don't do config changes manually, handle input, keep your UI super adaptable and awesome. How's my time doing? Hey, I'm on time. Okay. I'd like to go a bit deeper into input, which is one of my favorite topics if you've seen some of my previous videos. And I think this is because we're making apps for users, and we want to make super cool, exciting user experiences. And when a user's using an app, it's basically what they see on the screen or what they're hearing if they're using an audio interface, and how they interact, so what their input is. And so thinking through like that actual experience, I think, can allow us to make really cool things. So I'm going to do this backwards, from like really far out use cases to the more common use case. I worked with a couple of apps. Oh, I should have done a drawing in here. But I worked with a couple of apps, like DJ apps, that had DJ controllers where you could scratch. There's Cubasis, supports audio interfaces, so you can have a whole digital audio workstation like on your phone or on your tablet, which is super cool. And there's one, Dep-like, you plug in an adapter and you can use your guitar, and your phone is basically like a guitar amp with a whole bunch of pedal effects, or your Chromebook or your tablet. So I'm basically saying input could be a guitar or a DJ controller. And if that's not the app you're building, what app are you building, and what kind of input experiences could be transformative? Getting a little more concrete, a little more common, there's this giant stylus. So stylus is quite common these days, even more so as screens get larger. Tablets come with them. Chromebooks, like this one, often have styluses built in. Obviously, foldables come with them. And most of the time, you don't have to do anything. Most touchscreen interface with stylus just works automatically. But I think there's a challenge out there. What could your app do better if you supported like stylus hover, or pressure sensitivity, or tilt even, to make your app like super cool for users? And if you have a drawing app, check out I'll have the link at the end again, the low latency stylus library we have for Android. It's actually based on ChromeOS work we did. We do some GPU tricks and also have prediction to make a super low latency stylus. Cool. Moving on to my favorite topic, which you should all be doing, which is supporting keyboard. And I think everyone should take the action item if you haven't. You plug a USB keyboard into your phone and try your app. And just see if you can use your app without touching the screen. Because there are users that are in that situation for various reasons. And I don't have the pink robot, but in the pink robot trying to chat, that's the same situation. Anytime you have a chat function or contact support or enter a numerical value for one of your sliders, if you're pressing enter and it's not working, it can be really frustrating. So I need to show a little bit of code in this talk. So on the views system, this is how you handle enter key. You just look for on key up, see if it's enter, and then send the message. Remember to pass it up to the system or return false if you don't handle it. And it basically looks the same in Compose, just with a few more closing braces. You add a modifier for on key event. You check if it's on key up and see if it's the enter key. Most of the time you're looking for key up. If you're writing a game or something, you might look for key down, but you have to remember to handle, if the user hold down the key, you might get like hundreds of repeated key events, so you need to handle that case. And lastly, if you have like a game, you need to handle WASD or arrow keys. If you have an editor, you want to handle save or undo, redo. So here's in Compose how to handle save. It's quite easy. You just check if Control is pressed and the S key is pressed, then you can save. So all of those are kind of must-have shortcuts, I think, personally. So please check them out in your app. Make sure the basic functionality works. But there's a whole bunch of use cases that you can add to make your app like really, really great for your power users. So I'm thinking of examples like VLC, the media player, has a whole ton of media shortcut keys. Advance frame, pause frame, obviously spacebar for play and pause. Games to open the inventory, or like Minecraft to craft things has a bunch of shortcuts in chat. Or one DJ app I worked with, they added shortcut keys for the keyboard, so you don't even need a MIDI controller. You can like scratch and flip disks just with your keyboard, which I think is great. So obviously it depends what app you're writing, but I think thinking through how you can make your app work incredibly well for your power users, those users that are spending a ton of time in your app, that love your app, that can't wait for the next release. How do you make that experience incredible for them, as well as the new users that are coming in that need it a little bit more accessible? Oh, there we go, one more slug. Mouse input is another thing that we don't think about all that often when you're designing for phones, because it doesn't seem that often that you actually plug a mouse into a phone. But it's quite common, obviously, on Chromebooks, and some of the detachable tablets have little trackpads built in. Most of the time, the good news is mouse input will just work. If you're handling touch, you'll handle mouse input, no big deal. And if you even have custom scrolling code, like this is kind of the classic Compose custom scrolling code, mostly taken from the docs, it just works. So you add a scrollable modifier, and you can do your custom scrolling code, and that will just work with a mouse or with on-screen thing. And so taps and scrolling work automatically, but one thing that doesn't necessarily translate as well is right-click. So on traditional desktop environments, you right-click to bring up the context-specific menu, and we're all used to, well, many of us are probably used to that. I shouldn't say that anymore. I'm getting old. Some of the young people have only grown up with touchscreen phones. I've done some presentations in schools in Paris, where I live, and there's so many interesting things about the 12-year-olds, how they've grown up in the world. Like, they don't know what a browser is. They don't know what it is, and they don't know what Google is. They don't know how to search, because you just type in the word, Anyway, that was a complete digression. But so it's possible that some of you have no idea what right-click is. So imagine the olden days with a big PC, you right-click on the mouse and it brings up a context menu. But on touchscreens, you usually do a long press to bring up that context menu, which makes perfect sense. But there's not really like a long click paradigm, usually. And so you do need to add right-click And this is quite easy with views. There's a method called onContextClick. It works for long press and right click. And we need that in Compose. And I filed a bug, but we don't have it yet. So for Compose, you need to do a bit more advanced. You set up pointer input modifier, and then look for await pointer event scope, and handle the event. You can check which buttons are pressed. This is super powerful, and you can add your own custom gestures and handle all the button events you want. There you are. And just a note, there's so many closing braces, I kind of condensed them all here. This will probably not compile, but I hope you get the point. I am pro Compose. This is not a complaint, just something I've noticed. I have one more quick input talk. That's me, by the way, during COVID. On one more topic here, which is about changing input methods while you're using an app. I'm not going to repeat all the gritty details because I have this video here. So at this link, which is also at the end of the thing, there's the link to this video. And basically, like, especially for games, if you're using a game on a Chromebook, for example, you might switch between using the touchscreen to using the keyboard or connect with a Bluetooth controller or with the tablet. On small screens, you're not that likely to be changing input methods while using the app. Most of the time, this doesn't matter. Your app handles all these great input methods. You know, handles the guitar, handles the gamepad controller, all's good. But if your UI changes based on input, you need to know that. So in a game, you might have on-screen joystick controllers, and if somebody's using a keyboard to play, you don't want those joysticks taking up half the screen. So I think this is interesting. There's lots of ways to handle it. In the video, I talk about one thing, which is basically a lazy prioritized state diagram to handle that situation. I guess I included this in this talk because I think it's worth thinking through how users, especially younger users, let's say. Does anyone teach in this room? Teach like high school or? Wow, that's amazing. Okay, I used to teach high school, it was cool. But our students had these computers, and the way they would use the keyboard and touch screen at the same time, like they kind of like reach around sideways, and I had no idea how they were interacting with their device, but I think people are using their devices differently. So it's worth thinking about what happens in your app and what kind of assumptions we're making about UI and input. You all should you should go teach a few classes. I think it's really informative to teach at young people. Oh, I do have one more last thing about input. Play games on PC is a really cool way is there game developers in the audience? No, okay, well, I have a game section at the end. I might shorten up a bit. Well, if you have any friends that make games, this is great. And you can tell them, the good news is if they optimize for play games on PC, they can also, basically doing the same optimizations gets you the same optimizations for other large screens. Wow, I don't know my audience, I guess. Okay, let's move on from that to layout. There might be some people on the live stream. So for those on the live stream, take a look at Google Play Games on PC. It's a great way to get your games in front of more users. So let's move on to layout. I'm just going to take a moment to appreciate BugDroid having their body back online here. So remember, I don't know if I should say that. Some of you may remember back in 2000 when we were moving on the web to this paradigm of adaptable layouts. And there was a lot of websites that hadn't quite got there, and they mostly looked like this. So they had like a very skinny column in the middle and these huge bars on the side. And the web designers say, well, we need this button and it's 40 pixels wide, so that's it. And this banner is 200 pixels wide. Everything was fixed pixel widths. And so websites had to look like that or else everything would be all wonky. So it's really easy for me to make fun of that back in that day. But the reality is today a lot of mobile designers are doing the same thing. And they say, well, our design team made this asset and it's 40 pixels, so that's it. And when it turns out on a 4K screen, 4K monitor, it looks rough. So I do think we need to really think about how to make our layouts adaptable. And I'm going to actually read my script here in case I missed anything. No, great. So I think that's really easy for me to throw out and say, hey, just make your app adapt to all screens, all device sizes, any possible situation, and just magically work for everything, no problem, right? But the reality is that's really hard, especially with mobile devices. We don't have the same assumptions with websites and desktop computers. So there's a whole talk on this. Oh wait, hold on, I gotta go back here. Pretend you didn't see that. This is like a pre-announce, which I'm not 100% sure I can say, but coming very soon as the next release of Compose in alpha, we have some really, really cool new libraries coming out to help make this a lot easier. So I'm really excited about them. Please check them out, watch the GitHub, file issue reports, let us know if they're good or terrible or we missed the mark, because it's something we've been working on for a couple of years now. So I hope you like it. Coming soon, November-ish, I think. But something that already exists and you could be using right now is window size classes. So this is a way to help figure out what window size your app is running in right now, which big kind of bucket your app is running in, and then dynamically shift your UI to match. And dynamically, I really mean it. We were talking about resizing. So on Dex or ChromeOS, your app can be resized, or if you're unfolding, or if tablets you're running on a tablet and it gets moved to split screen mode, your app will suddenly have different amount of space. Maybe it was in portrait, now it's in landscape, and you need to be able to adapt gracefully to that. So using window size classes, you use calculate window size class, and then you get which bucket you're in, and you can move into it. So I have one more UX challenge to present to you. This is kind of coming out with my work on media apps. And I don't have the right answer. I actually think it's up to devs to answer this question. So if you think about having a video editor or a photo editor, think of some, imagine some in your mind using those. Some of them have like hundreds of tools. And sometimes for a normal workflow, like 50 of those tools will be like super, super important to what you need to do. And how do you present that to the user in our current day? And I think there's two options. One, you could go super simple. You could say, okay, it's mobile, it's on a phone. We're going to just present like 3 of them on the screen and these really accessible buttons. And we'll make the flow really usable and accessible. But all your power users that really want to use your app to do what they need to do are going to get really frustrated because they have to go through layers and layers of menus and subscreens to try to find that resize or crop tool or color tool that they need. But the other option is to present all the tools in these tiny little icons and this tiny little text and these tiny little menus. Think of any desktop photo editor you may have used or video editor. And if you're bug droid, your arms are too big to actually even press those touch targets when you have that many on the screen, let alone see them. So that's the challenge. How do you present a lot of options to your user? And maybe you're lucky and your app only has a few features, but as you add more and more features, this is something that comes up. So I think it's an open challenge. I don't have the full answer, but I'm going to call out one app I had the privilege of working with. It's a drawing app, Concepts. They have this like expandable, dynamic, spinny, colorful wheel for all their tools. And so it's a little circle and you press it, and then it goes, and you can spin around and you can select all the colors and go down and change the brushes. And it's gotten me thinking, like, maybe that's the future on these screens of different sizes, is some sort of dynamic toolbar paradigm that we need to dig deeper into. Anyway, call out to them, and a challenge to all of you to think about how do you surface all your actions in this like really beautiful, adaptable, fluid way. Voila. So I'm going to move on now to some, how are we doing? Good? Okay, good. I got some thumbs up. I'm going to move on to a couple things I've worked on personally, which is media and games. Lately, the games section might get advocated. So these apps I've been working with, they ran into some specific challenges adapting for ChromeOS. So my job is to sort of help them make this app work great on ChromeOS and answer questions and file bugs against our systems. And I think these challenges are not just issues and bugs and it's broken and Google made a mistake again. I think like the Android ecosystem is growing and changing, and that's good. I don't think anyone in this room wants all the APIs to be static and fixed and never change, because users' needs are changing, your needs are changing as devs, OEMs are creating new devices, this is changing, and so Android needs to change, the APIs need to change and get better, and there's growing pains involved in that situation, but I think it's good pain, I hope. So I was lucky to be able to work with Lumafusion for the last 3 years, and they launched in February, so we have a professional video editing suite on Android now and ChromeOS, which is Lumafusion. Super proud of that. And I thought I'd talk a little bit about this process. So when we first approached them, so I'm learning Italian, so Lumaca I thought would be like Lumafusion, that's why they're a slug. So that's my Italian English. It's good. Okay, I got some thumbs up from the Italians. So that's me, and I'm saying, hey, do you want to do this Android port? This would be really great. We'd really love to have this professional editor on Android. And they said no. And we're like, why not? It'd be such a great idea. And they said, there's simply not any APIs to do what we need to do. And the problem was they were completely correct. There wasn't really the API surface that they needed. I had made this kind of proof of concept app that had 4 video streams running at the same time, and you could add an OpenGL effect. But it was a pretty far cry from what they needed. So I had this brilliant idea. I was like, so what if, we sort of give you some advice and you create an open source project that proves to yourself and everyone else that this is possible. So basically building your own API, building the library you need to do what you need to do. And they actually said okay. So that's actually what happened. And the CEO of Lumafusion built an iOS version that had 4 media streams of different frames per second and different formats, and changed the speed of them and had some rotation and translation. He did it by himself. It took him about 5 days to build the iOS version. Then they hired oops, I think I advanced too fast. Then they hired a team to build the Android version, and it took 7 months. So obviously a bit harder undertaking. But it actually worked, and so it got open sourced. I'll put the link up in a second. And that hadn't really been done before on ChromeOS, to have 4 4K videos being made into a media composition at the same time. So we were doing good, and we felt like we were almost there. This is coming. And we had another 2 years after that before it launched. Oh, maybe I was supposed to skip. Here's some of the building blocks that they had to build out, which I don't think I'll need to go into every single one of those. But there's a lot. You think just like putting a few videos together and changing the color filter would be easy, but it's a bit more trickier than that. The first sample I built looked something like this. So you can see the 4 different screens. I added audio synchronization and a few different features. It's still available. It's great, and there's like about 20 branches, because over time I tried to add like 4K performance measures, and like what if we did this, and what if we had 8 videos. So it's a pretty fun, overloaded project at this point. And Luma's demo looks something like this. So the main difference is they have 1 full composition. So instead of the 4 separate streams, they're actually synchronizing everything and combining everything into one. Both of these projects used Exoplayer for playback, which is cool. They were satisfied with this, and they were like, okay, let's move on and let's do the full Android port. Now, Exoplayer is great, but it's designed for playing back 1 video stream, especially streaming media. And it works super well for that, but when you're combining all these things and adding effects, it actually gets complicated, and you have to do all these workarounds and wrappers. If you check out my first project, you'll see I've got my own custom GL surfaces that have manual locks and all sorts of exciting stuff going on. And so as we approached I/O 2022, we were hoping to launch, Lumafusion was like, yeah, the performance isn't where we want it for our users. And so we're going to rewrite our whole media pipeline not to use Exoplayer, which is a little bit sad. because Media, I'm going to talk about it in a second. Media 3 is now building out new libraries for video editing that are a lot more performant, but Lumafusion was just a couple years ahead. So they had to rebuild their media thing, but it worked. They launched, and you can download it, you can use it today. So there we have it. That's cool. I want to talk about a few problems that they encountered, which are mostly our fault, mostly ChromeOS's fault. But I hope it's interesting to hear about kind of the pain points when designing for new device surfaces. So we're pushing not only Android to its limits with this app, because the APIs just weren't there, but we were pushing ChromeOS. I hope you know a little bit about Chromebooks, but if not, we have some high-end devices, i7s with like 16 gigs of RAM. I think there's some 32 gig RAM devices. And then there's a lot of 4 gig Celerons, 4 gig of RAM Celeron devices, which are a lot slower. So we're really pushing ChromeOS to its limit. We had this dramatic decode bug where it would completely destroy all media decoding on Android until you reboot the device. So anything that used Android decoding, including Netflix, Disney+, just some small apps like that. And this was running up to the launch of Lumafusion in 2002. So that was, or 2022. Sorry, a little slightly dyslexic there. Eventually it was just traced to a memory allocation error, but it's interesting because on ChromeOS we're running Android in a VM. ChromeOS is cool. We have a really locked down Linux distribution. And then we run like web browser and web apps in a VM, Android in a VM, Linux in a VM. You can even have Windows apps in a VM with parallels. So it's a cool project, and it works like very well considering what we're doing in a VM, in my opinion. And the performance is pretty good, but as you can imagine, there's a lot of juggling going on, because in a VM you can't make everything super synchronous, especially with heavy things like video editing, or it's too slow. And we had this glitch in that juggling process. Like if you open up a directory with 20 media files, Lumafusion would generate the thumbnails. So it would create a codec, release, create, release, create, release, and what was happening is we just missed the juggle. So they would be allocated, and then we'd close the codec, but it wouldn't be deallocated before the next one was allocated, and we just would use up all the GPU memory. I could talk about that particular bug for a lot longer, but I won't. You can talk to me after about it. We fixed it. And one last sort of glitch we ran into working with large screens. This was actually an Android mainline error. The app was in full screen. Everything was working fine, but if you open like an export dialog, it would come up as a dialog window, which would temporarily kick the app out of full screen because there was there was a whole other window popping up. And then when you went back to the app, there'd be this exciting, this big black bar where the launcher bar was. And you see this on Android tablets. There's kind of now an app launcher bar, and ChromeOS has a launcher bar. And yeah, this was a bug in Android that we were able to fix for versions after Android 10. Okay, I think this is close to my last media topic. I just want to give some silver lining to all the media bugs and all the pain in case you're working on media apps. Media 3 is a big investment in Android right now. They're really trying to build up just to solve this problem. And I work quite closely with them, obviously, through this Lumafusion project. And it's going to be from Android 21 and onward, so like 99% of Android devices. It's going to have all these great things. They've already launched a bunch of good things, and the most exciting ones are in the transformer, or most exciting to me, are in the transformer section. So there's like really easy transcoding. There's a whole bunch of HDR tools that are already launched you can already use, and some composition ones that are they're getting better fast, and they're coming along. And you can use them independently of ExoPlayer in case you have your own media engine, for example. Here's a quick code example of transcoding. So I don't know if you've ever tried to transcode on Android, but it's not trivial. And now you just basically set up a transformer with the output media you want, and then you run it, and it transcodes it. This is a big effort by the team. I think it's been stable for a while now, so it works pretty well. And speaking of video editing, one of the problems with the previous Android APIs is there wasn't a concept of a whole composition. It was just about like one video file, working on one video file. And so already launched is this composition piece of Media 3, which it's only sequential right now, but it allows you to combine multiple video files into one output. And so it looks pretty easy. You have one video and then the second video and you put it. But if you've ever done this on Android, there's a lot of complexity into handling these formats, these frame rates. What do you do with all those pixels? So I don't know if we need to watch this. Oh, it says impossible to load the video. No problem. You can believe that the dog jumping on the bed and then a big buck bunny fit together. It works great, promise. So hold on, just to visualize this, one happening after the other. And coming soon, multiple videos interposed on top of each other, not only sequential. Okay, well, yeah, I think it's worth mentioning this. One like real life thing that happened with Lumafusion is with extraction, media extraction. So that's if you have an MP4, AVI, MP3 file, you have the file, and then Android needs to take the frames out of the file. So the literal, I should go like this, right? So I just realized my left-right thing. So you have the file, and you have to like take the frames out of the file. It's still encoded, so it's not even decoding yet. But there's a bunch of complexity there, based, block size, headers, all this stuff. And as you probably know, Android has a lot of fragmentation. So there's like 3 billion devices, which is like, 3 billion plus devices. And if you've looked on your Play Developer Console under Device Catalog, there's a lot of devices on Earth, a lot of Android devices. And that's a huge complexity that's on your shoulders and on Google's shoulders to support. So it's, I don't like the expression, blessing and a curse. It's, it's too much chocolate, which is a good thing, but when you eat too much chocolate, you don't feel well. So, it's one of those type of situations. And so Lumafusion had all these workarounds for these devices that didn't support this audio format or this video format, or would sometimes do this thing if the file was too long. And it was super complicated. And they were able to use the Media 3 extractor library and drop it in. And so now they're getting a whole bunch of those workarounds for free, and they get updates, and it's really great. And if you're working on media at all, and any piece from Google that you can take that handles this fragmentation for you, I think, just do it. It's a big win. And then you can file bugs and issues, especially in Media 3. There's a super active team working against it. Then if there's a fix, it goes out to everybody, or if people have workarounds. Great. And to wrap up, I don't think I have another slide for Media 3. I just want to say check it out, see what's happening, check out the I/O announcements around Media 3. There's a lot of exciting stuff coming, some of which I unfortunately can't tell you all about because it's still not released, but it's great. And go to the GitHub, file issues, and please let them know if stuff's not working for you, or if you wish there was this piece in the API, because they're really actively working on it. I'm on to my last section, so I'll be a little bit quick about this. So I think there's some valuable things, even if you don't work on games. I had another multi-year project. Maybe I'm just celebrating myself right now, which is okay. But we launched Minecraft on Chromebooks. It took a couple of years, which is a big challenge. But it works great. Keyboard, mouse, external monitors, multiplayer, Ethernet. It works just like you'd expect a game to run on a laptop. And it's launched in Italy. And I think if you buy a Chromebook, you get it for free, plus a free subscription. Okay, I'm proud of myself, and I'll stop promoting it, but it's like a big deal. A little bit like the media thing. There's some complexity in there. And I think this is relevant for other apps too, especially if you have a rendered UI, so if you're not just using standard views. Larger screens have more pixels, obviously. So not obviously. There's some small screens with a lot of pixels. But often let's say there's a lot more pixels, and you have to worry about performance, especially if you're on a tablet with multiple apps running at the same time, or on ChromeOS with multiple windows. You have the same apps competing for CPU, GPU, and RAM. And I wish I could tell you, use this API and your app will run way, way, way faster. Your app will be that much better. But in fact, there's some hardcore engineering work that needs to be done to improve performance, which could be an entire talk, which I'd like to give someday. But how do you profile? How do you make these things better? But I will say, some devs we've worked with on ChromeOS that said, hey, the performance isn't there on the Celeron device. And we've gone through a bunch of profiling and we've improved the app. It works great on ChromeOS. Also, they got a lot of improvements on their phone apps. So better battery life, better performance across all their users. So sometimes this kind of work is really good to do, especially because there's a lot of users on Earth, and those 3 billion users that don't have the newest phone and don't have the fastest phone. So don't forget about them. One more funny thing that we ran into working with games is control in space. Speaking of keyboard, in a lot of games, if you hold down control, you run. And if you press space, you jump. And all that was working really great. But if you did it at the same time, on some devices, what was happening was the keyboard layout would change. And this was an Android-specific bug. It's a system shortcut. And because it's a system shortcut, there was no way for devs to do anything with it. It just control space would change the keyboard layout. But we didn't notice it at first because if you only have one keyboard layout defined, nothing happens. It works perfectly fine. The game would get the jump signal. But luckily, some of us are, me sto imparando italiano, so I have to put the accento. So I had different keyboard layouts, and I'm like, wait, it just keeps changing the keyboard layout instead of doing it. So we had to add that, and we fixed it in Android, so it's kind of cool. Okay, I have one more story from the field. I'm still on time, so I'm going to just tell it. We found this really interesting bug with ANRs that showed up on large screen, showed up on ChromeOS specifically. This is probably a little too small to read, but if you've ever profiled in Perfetto, this is bad. So those little bars are an application not responding, meaning the user gets that pop-up that says, this app is not responding, do you want to force close it? And then, this is deliver input event not being delivered, so it's not good. This was happening on our high-end devices. So usually these type of ANRs happen on slow devices where you're doing something super, super heavy. And this was happening on like a plain menu screen. Nothing was happening on our i7s with 16 gigs of RAM. And we were like, what's going on? And it turned out to be a call to basically look at the amount of free space. It was an Open Directory call that was related to a call to look at the amount of free space. And it was the developer error. They were looking for, they were doing this on the main thread. And the Android doc specifically said in bold, do not run this on the main thread. It may take several seconds. Da, da, da. So we can say, okay, it was the developer's fault. But on most phones, it was fine because it was returning fast enough. But because ChromeOS is in a VM, it was taking longer. And our high-end Chromebooks especially had giant hard drives. They're looking through 1 terabyte to see how many free inodes there were. So voila. So they fixed it, and it improved the speed on phones and also removed those kind of random ANRs that their users were getting on phones due to this root cause. So that was kind of cool. And that's just about the end of my talk. I just have a couple tiny slides as promised. And I want to make sure we have time for questions, which we do. Here's that link one more time. Check it out. Check out your app. That's what I said. Here's my slide with all the links. And as that is up, I'll just say, sto imparando italiano. Dunque, si vuoi parlare con me. I'd love to practice my Italian. Maybe I'll move here to Torino one day and eat chocolate all the time, basically. And gelato vegano. And with that, I think it's live questions time.
Thank you, Emilie.